Good evening, everybody. Hope all is well. I'm just looking for Darren, who I think is having some bandwidth issues this evening. So I'm not sure.
Can you hear me, Grant?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Excellent.
Whoa, that's a crazy angle.
Well, I'm on my phone at the moment while I try and get the laptop back up. So that's not looking good at this precise moment in time. Sorry. So have you opened up?
Everyone's in, and we're recording,
Everyone's in.
so we're good to go.
We're all good to go. Excellent. Okay. I have no idea what's going on now. I can't see. I can't see a thing. So okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm currently in a camping field somewhere in either deepest, darkest Bedfordshire or deepest, darkest Cambridgeshire. I can't exactly work out where, but anyway, hope you've all had a good week. As usual, we're recording this session, and we're really thrilled to have with us tonight Steve Richards again. As you remember, Steve Richards kicked off our sessions for Stargazine 18 weeks ago now. So we're really pleased to have him back to follow up from that excellent talk. And tonight, Steve's going to be concentrating on the processing of the data. And I'm sure you've all read the description on the forum of some of the steps that Steve is going to be going through, from stretching of the data right the way through to the final tweaks and sharpening before publishing your exploits out onto the forum. As usual, we're recording the session, so if you do miss anything, you can go back and watch it again. I think for this session, we're probably going to ask again for questions to come in via the chat, and we'll collate them all and then open up the Q&A session towards the end, or rather after Steve's talk. I think that's probably the best thing to do. So without further ado, Steve, over to you, please.
Okay, Grant, thank you very much indeed. I will attempt to share my screen, which should be this one. Right, in theory, we should have image processing, dark art or magic bullet up.
Yes, we can see that, Steve, yep.
Okay, great. Right, good evening, everybody. It's nice to be back again. Tonight's talk is really a follow-on, as Grant has said, as Daz has said, from the very end of my first talk, which was about the 6 Fs, the last of which was finish. And so I'm going to be now expanding on that, the finish being the image processing aspects of the whole imaging malarkey. These are the various processes that we're going to go through. I won't read them off the screen. It's always considered to be very bad form, but if you just have a very quick squint at that, you'll see that these are the things that I want to cover. I'm going to be doing a lot of the work exactly the way that I do it, but the very first part is actually not the way I would normally do it. But I've deliberately chosen Deep Sky Stacker for the first part, rather than my own system, which is either Maxim or PixInsight, simply because that if you're a beginner, you'll almost certainly start off with Deep Sky Stacker. So that's why I've chosen that. And some of the processes that I'm going to show you, that there will be quicker ways of doing them, but I've particularly chosen to do them the way I'm doing them this evening, to give you an understanding of why we're doing it, rather than just you learning, if you like, by rote, the way to process. It's far better if you've got an understanding of what's going on. And so, you know, not necessarily the quickest way, but it will actually give you a better understanding of what's going on. For the processing itself, I'm going to be using these 3 pieces of software. I'm going to be using Deep Sky Stacker, as I've just mentioned. That's going to be used for the calibration, the registration, also known as alignment, and the stacking process itself. But as soon as I've actually got my masters produced, and there will be 4 of those masters, I'll be moving straight into Photoshop. But rather than save the files as TIFF files, which you can do from within Deep Sky Stacker, I'm going to encourage you to save them as FITS files. FITS files are, if you like, the astronomy standard data file. They have some advantages in that there are lots of extra pieces of information in the header. And therefore, I always think it's nice to try and stick within FITS until you actually move on to the final part of the processing, which will be done in Photoshop. And to get the FITS files into Photoshop, we're going to use a piece of software called FITS Liberator. It's quite specifically version 2.3. It's not the latest version, but that's because the latest version doesn't automatically interface with Photoshop. And obviously, we wanted to interface with Photoshop for tonight's process. There are links on the SGL website where you can download Deep Sky Stacker and FITS Liberator. But unfortunately, no link for downloading Photoshop. Most beginners tend to start with Photoshop. There are various ways that you can obtain a copy. So what I'm intending to do is to literally the raw data files, and I've deliberately chosen this particularly bad one, which you'll see has got a lovely satellite trail going all the way through it. But I've chosen that one on purpose because I will be using this in the final stack, and I want to show you how even something as hideous as this this satellite trail can be removed in the post-processing process. This is what we're going to hope to end up with, a reasonable image of the Whirlpool galaxy in LRGB. Now, it's quite important to have a sensible folder structure for your data. It makes it far easier for you in the future to revisit your files, and it makes it easier for you to do your processing so you know where everything is. So here's just a typical set of the folder structure that I would use, where I've got the calibration files separate, and I've got a slot for each of the individual masters to go. You'll see that I've got a blue, green, a luminance, and a red. They're not populated at the moment, but they will be by the end of this process. So quite important to make sure that you can find your data very easily. And the very first part that I'm going to show you in Deep Sky Stacker, it's quite important that you can easily find your luminance files in particular. These are individual subframes showing you the sort of data that I should be using. These are unprocessed bar a tiny stretch so that you can actually see the detail. And you'll see that we've got luminance top left, red top right, green bottom left, and blue bottom right. And these are taken from the actual data set that we'll be using for this process. We'll also be using some calibration files. The bias file on the top left, as I explained in my earlier talk, this is an image taken at the shortest possible exposure with the telescope capped. If you're using a CMOS camera, you probably wouldn't use the shortest exposure. You would probably use something like a 1/30th of a second, something like that, because there are some issues with some CMOS cameras with regard to the BIOS. But if you're using a CCD camera, you would take it with the shortest possible exposure that you can. The middle image, the dark on the top row, this is an image taken at exactly the same exposure time as the image data itself. And I hope that you can see in here there are various little dots of white. These are hot pixels, and these are exactly what we're using the dark frame for, because by subtracting the dark frame from our images, we'll be able to get rid of these hot pixels, or at least a goodly number of them. The flat frames have all sorts of uses. First of all, you'll notice that there's a light fall off towards the corner. This is called vignetting. All your light frames will also suffer from this vignetting effect. And by applying a flat frame to each of your luminance, red, green, and blue frames, you'll be able to counteract the worst effects of this vignetting. But it's not just the vignetting. I hope you can see in these images, in particular this one, these little dots. Perhaps if Grant could just confirm that you can see these dots, because there's no point in me talking about them if you can't see them.
You can see them clearly.
You can see them clearly. Fantastic. Thank you. You'll notice then there's a small dot there, there's a much larger one there, a large one there, and a small one there. Now, the flats, as well as being very, very important in the processing, they actually tell you quite a lot about your image cone as well, or rather your light cone. And perhaps if you just have a look over here at the red one, for example, you'll notice that that dot is in the same place as that dot on the green and that dot on the blue, and also this dot here on the luminance. So we know that these are little dust motes, but we can also tell immediately that they're not on the filter. In actual fact, they're on the cover glass that covers the sensor itself, and that's why they're small. So I can tell you by looking at these 3 flats at the bottom that my filters are lovely and clean, because these are identical. And so any marks that I've got here are caused by dust motes on the cover glass of the sensor itself. But to my horror, on my luminance frames, I've got these 2 rather large and rather, actually there's another one there, 3 rather large and rather unpleasant pieces of dust. These are indicative of me having dust on my luminance filter. So it can be quite useful just examining your flats to give you an idea of what's happening inside your telescope, inside your camera. But one of the great things about flat frames is that not only will they recover data that is being lost, if you like, by the vignetting in the corners, but these smudges will also be removed from your light frames, because of course if they're in your flat frames, they'll be in your light frames as well. And so a very nice side effect of running flats, and why to me they're very important, is that they will also remove the worst effects of dust motes as well. So we're going to be using 3 individual sets of data to produce our color image. We're going to be using red data, green data, and blue data. I've artificially colored these. Of course, these will all be grayscale, in fact, but this is what we're aiming for. And we will, of course, be adding a luminance channel later on, which is purely a grayscale, but it holds all the data for both the red, green, and blue wavelengths of light. So let's get on, start doing some processing. Right, I'm going to start off, of course, in Deep Sky Stacker, as I mentioned earlier. And there are various options here up in the top left-hand corner. We're going to start off by opening our picture files. We're not going to open any of the calibration files at this stage, because the calibration is going to be done at a later date, because I want to separate these 2 processes from one another. You can actually use Deep Sky Stacker to do the whole job for you in one fell swoop, but I prefer to do them separately, and I would recommend that you do as well. It gives you more control. So what I'm actually going to do is to open the picture files. But more than that, I'm going to specifically open the luminance files first, and I'll explain why in just a second. So let me just open up my luminance files. And there they are. The important thing here is I want all my luminance files to be at the beginning of this list of data files. And the reason for that is that when you do the alignment, the alignment system automatically chooses the first of the files in the list. And I think it's always important to use your luminance channel as the reference image, if you like, for that alignment. So I've loaded up the luminance channels. I'm now going to go to the next channel, which will be red. Doesn't matter which order in which I open these now, but I'll now open my red data. I'm going to move on to my green. Whoops. Right, green data. And finally, I'm going to open my blue. And you'll notice I've got very few frames in my blue. This, of course, happens with the weather we have in the UK. You can never guarantee you're going to have a lovely session each time. But again, I thought it was important to show you just what happens under those circumstances. I mean, I've only got 6 blue frames. I would normally aim for considerably more than that if I could. So that's all our frames and data loaded. If we look at the filter sets here, we see we've got luminance, red, green, and blue. What I need to do now is to check them all. So if you look over on the left-hand side, there's a little button here, check all. And you'll see that these have all now got a tick alongside them. So these are all ready for the very first part of our process, which is the registration or the alignment. Some pieces of software call it registration, some call it alignment. And if we look down here, you'll see that we've got an option here to register all the checked images. So I'm going to click on that. Little warning sign comes up just to warn you that you haven't got any darks and flats set, but that's fine because I'm not going to stack them yet. So I'm quite happy with that. And you'll see that in the center here, I have unticked where it says stack after registering. That's because I want to do it as a separate process altogether. If we have a quick look at the stacking parameters, you'll see that I've selected in here that I want the intermediate and final image to be in the FITS format, and that I want to use all the available processors. So I'm going to click on OK on that, and we're actually now ready to go. So click on the OK button, and you'll see that it's registering 56 different images, and they will all be registered to the very first of the luminance channels, or rather the luminance frames that we've got here. Sorry, this is going to take a little bit of time to run, but it's not going to be horrendous. The reason I would encourage you to do your alignment on luminance is that luminance is the channel that holds all the really important detail, and therefore I feel that it's best to just put the, if you like, the overcoat of color on top of that, which is of course what actually happens in the imaging process. But you may as well start off with the luminance as being the base that you work from. There we go. They have now all been aligned. In actual fact, nothing's actually happened to the files themselves, but each one of those now in the subdirectories will have a text file associated with it, which has all sorts of information on how the individual frames have been aligned. And that information is used later on for when we do the stacking. So I'm now going to move on and stack the luminance frames. So the first thing I need to do is to get rid of the green and blue. You can actually untick them, but I prefer to just get rid of them for now. So we've now just got our luminance data here. But I mentioned earlier that we're going to, as well as do the stacking, we're going to do the calibration now. So it's at this point that we start bringing in our calibration files. So I'm going to start off with the dark files. And here they are. I then want to add the flat files. Now the flat files, of course, are specific to the individual filter that you use. So these blue ones here, of course, are of no use to me at all in the luminance section. So I'm just going to select the luminance ones. Takes me down to there. Those are my luminance flats. And the final set of data I want are my bias frames. And you'll notice that I've actually got more bias frames than I have any of the others. That's because bias frames are so quick and easy to take. You may as well capture more than are actually specifically needed. I check down here that all of these have got a tick alongside them, and you'll see that they have. All my lights are there. I haven't accidentally left in anything else that I don't want. Notice the L filter here shown alongside the flats. So I know that I specifically got the correct flats to go with this. The bias and the dark frames, of course, can be used with any of your subframes. So I'm now ready to stack the checked images. So we click on there and have a look at the stacking parameters. Now, the first thing we want to do is to click on the light frames and have a quick look at the method that we're going to stack. There are various different methods, as you see: average, median, kappa sigma, median, sigma, etc. The one that I would recommend that you use is kappa sigma clipping. So you put a little tick or a little click on the radio button there to select that. So that's the kind of stacking that we're going to do. And what is nice about this particular method is that it looks for out clear pixels. and it will then remove those outlier pixels. So if you've dithered your images in particular, for example, and you've got a hot pixel that the dark frames haven't removed, kappa sigma clipping will say, oh, well, that pixel there is different from all the other frames that I've got. Therefore, it must be a hot pixel, so I'll remove it. You'll do exactly the same with that nasty line that we had coming up here of the satellite trail. So kappa sigma is a great way of actually getting rid of unwanted artifacts in your images. If we look at the dark frames, we simply want to use median, same for the flats, same for the bias. If we move on to the intermediate files, we just want to make sure that we're definitely going to do these as fits, which we are. We can then move into the next tab, which is cosmetic. And you'll see that I've just put a little tick alongside detect and clean remaining hot pixels. And finally, we want to tell the software where we want it to save the product of its stacking. And here I wanted to go into this subdirectory here, into masters and into the L for luminance channel. So I now click on OK and OK again, and off it goes. It's now doing some calculations. And then in a minute, we're going to see that it's going to start working on the calibration files. So it's now adding what it's calling an offset frame. That's the bias frame. It's adding that. You'll notice that's the one that had the larger number. It's got 30 individual files. You'll be pleased to know that after this, it gets a lot quicker. It's now adding the dark frame, or rather the dark frames. What it's doing in advance, by the way, is producing masters of each of those. So there's now a master bias and there's a master dark frame. It's now adding the flat frame. And now it's doing the actual stacking itself. You'll be pleased to know that the red, green and blue will actually operate much quicker than this. And the reason for that is that having produced a bias master and a darks master, we can reuse just that master. And so the only file that now will have to be integrated into our images and processed with them will be the flat itself. So it'll be quicker from now on. And there we go. There's our image. It looks absolutely grotesque at the moment, but that's cool. That's what image processing is all about. It's doing something really good with that. Now, there are some tweaks that you can do in Deep Sky Stacker, but we're not going to do any at all. We're simply going to leave the data as its basic format. We're not going to make any changes to it at all. But we will take this opportunity to just go to the luminance channel that's been automatically saved and rename it by putting an L before it to remind us that this is the luminance data channel. Then we can go back to Deep Sky Stacker. And we're now finished with the majority of the luminance channels, but not all of them. There's one more little thing that we can do in here, and that is we want to align, or rather we want to register and stack all the others with some kind of reference to the luminance. And you'll see we've got a score down here. If we look down these scores, I'm looking for the highest number, 1652. That looks pretty high in this list. I haven't seen one bigger than that. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to make that my reference frame. I'm then going to delete all the rest of the luminance data from here. All luminance there. Get rid of those. And we've now finished with the luminance flats. So I'm going to remove those as well. Quick process. I should have explained to you, you click on the first one, hold down the shift key, click on the last one, that selects them all, right click, and move down to remove from list. So we've now just got our bias frames, our dark frames, and somehow or other I've managed to leave some of the luminance in that I don't want. There we go. I've just got one luminance one now, and that's the one that I chose because it had a high score, and I'm going to use that for the rest of the process. So we've got our bias and darks and a single luminance. Now move on to the red data. So we open our picture files. Go to red, select all our red. Make sure that everything is ticked. And you can see here that these aren't. So check all. Right, all our reds are now ticked. Our bias and dark are ticked, but we still need to add the flat frames that pertain to the red channel. So we go to the flat frames and we look down here for our reds. There they are. We've now got all our flat frames for the red data. So we can now stack those. So go to stack, check pictures. All the same settings that we had before are still valid. So we can just change the output subdirectory that we want them to go into. Red obviously will go into our master red channel. So we select that and we're ready to go. And you'll notice that this time it's going to be much quicker. All it's got to do is to chunder its way through the flat frames because it can make use of the master dark and bias that we produced when we did the luminance. And there we go. That's our red data complete. Again, the image looks absolutely appalling, but we're not bothered about that. We've got plenty of other processing to do on it now. If I just do the same thing as before, there's the file that we produced, but I just need to rename it by putting in an R for red to remind us that it's the red data. And that's it. We've now got luminance and red have been correctly produced. Next thing we need to do is to move on to the next channel. So I need to get rid of the red data and the red flat data. So I should now just have single luminance, which I have, the darks and the offsets. So that's it. We're ready for, to move on to the green. So open the green data. And the green flat frames as well. There we go. If we now click on check all to make sure everything's ticked, just do a final check. We've got our single luminance, we've got our dark frames, we've got our bias frames, we've got our light frames for green, and we've got our green flats as well. So again, go to our stack the checked images. We want to make one minor change in that we want to put this data into the green channel. Whoops, master's green channel. And away we go. And again, this should be quite quick because it's reusing the bias and the flat and the dark frames again. like watching paint dry, I know, but I thought it was important for you to see the whole process going through.
Steve, just quickly while
Yes.
while that's doing it, Ian X6 Gas just says, since the L sub that is being used as the reference image for alignment is ticked, is that also being integrated into the stack?
No, it isn't. Oh, was it ticked? Ah, was it ticked? I didn't see it was ticked.
I must admit, I didn't see either, but Ian's probably got some sharp
It's a very
eyes.
good point, and it should not be ticked. Ah, I don't believe it. Thank you very much indeed. Well spotted. I told you I didn't use Deep Sky Stacker. I know it's very boring, but I'm going to have to very quickly do those two again. Thank you very much indeed, mate. That was well spotted. I love it. Well, I don't love it. I hate you.
Yeah, well, yeah, not me. Not yeah. Well spotted, Ian. Well spotted.
No, it was very well spotted. Thank you. I'm going to get rid of the red, and I've just done a green. Thank you. That would have, in the grand scheme of things, it would not have been a disaster because, of course, that single L would have been overwhelmed by the others. But let's do it properly.
Just goes to show that even the best of us are not infallible, Steve.
Yeah, well, it just proves that I'm most certainly not the best of them. That's for absolute certain. Right, I may as well leave the green here. Yep, the green is all there. That's correct. Thank you. Well spotted. That is that's annoying. Right, let's stack those. Make sure that we're still going to go into the green here, which we are. And away we go. Good job, no one can see how much I'm blushing at this moment in time with embarrassment.
No, Steve, not to worry, not to worry.
Right. That was the green. I'm now going to go to the green here and rename it. First, I should have put in brackets L as well. Okay, let's go back now, get rid of our green. Actually, this is a great way of making the talk go a bit longer, isn't it?
Were you worried you didn't have enough to cover then?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was going to take about 20 minutes, but now it's unfortunately it's probably going to be more like an hour. Okay, let's load in our red again. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. I really enjoyed watching the red doing its thing. So you know, to have the opportunity of seeing it again, I think it's a bit of a bonus.
I thought the red was a great stack.
It was the best so far, wasn't it?
Yes, mate, it was. Yeah, absolutely.
Check all. Right. Red. Luminance. Unticked. Let's not make the same mistake twice. Red.
I was going to say that would have been embarrassing if you.
Yeah.
That would have been really embarrassing.
You know what? I've just realised why this has happened. This is my own fault. I normally select the colour and then right-click that selection and click on tick, but I cheated and went to check all. Never go outside what you planned. Right, red flats, yes. Red lights, yes. That one undone, and we're ready to go. I want this to go into the red subdirectory. Oh, the red does look the best. That is really hammering along there. I'm loving that red again.
It's worth watching a second time, most certainly.
Excuse me. Yeah, you lovely red. I love you.
Indeed. Sorry, Steve. So Happy
Yes.
Cat says, does the reference frame selected still get reference as it is now unticked?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. In fact, we can show you that. You see this little asterisk alongside it? That's indicating that it is referenced.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, great.
There. Okay, so to get rid of the red and its accompanying flats, highlight them all, remove from the list, and we'll finally do the blue. Not happy about something here. Yes, I am. I'm happy. So I thought something had gone wrong, but it hasn't. I'm just looking for trouble now. Sure the blue is in there. Yes, it is. And we now go for the flat files that pertain to the blue, which are here. And you'll see that these blues are not ticked. Now, this is what I would normally do and fail to do this time. I would go down and select the blue, first one, down to the last one, right-click on it and check. And you'll see that now the luminance is not ticked, which is what I should have done the first time around. So we've got our reference, we've got dark, we've got bias, we've got the light blue frames, and we've got the sky flats for the blue. We can now go to stack. We want them to go to the blue folder here. And okay, and okay.
Me again, Steve. While that's stacking, I assume this is with your QSI CCD camera, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so there's a question from David's one. In fact, Grant's beaten me to it. So why we're not using dark flats? And I was going to say the answer to that being is it's a CCD camera and not a CMOS-based camera.
That's correct. I could use dark flats if my flats were really long exposures, but in fact they're not. I keep my my flats exposures down to somewhere around 8 seconds, often by using pieces of paper to dampen out some of the light. And an 8-second exposure with my particular camera does not require a flat dark. So, right, we need to rename that last one, which was blue. And we now have a set of, or we should now have a set of LRGB data, which is now being calibrated, aligned, calibrated, and stacked. With a little hiccup at the beginning, just to keep us on our toes. So if I now move on to the next stage, which is going to be when I move into Photoshop. But before I do, has anyone got any other questions on the alignment, stacking, and calibration front?
I haven't seen any others come in, and obviously we've been using the
the elapsed time while the stacking goes on, just to answer those couple of questions. But I think I can't see any others that have come in.
Cool. In that case, let's move on to onto Photoshop.
Oh, sorry, Steve.
Yes.
Carol says just a little confused about the renaming of the file after it has been stacked. Not sure what the confusion is.
Okay, Carol, the reason I've renamed them is that Deep Sky Stacker is automatically naming each file autosave.fit. So they would all have the same name, autosave.fit. So I'm renaming them by putting the L, R, G, or B before the word autosave so that I know which data I'm looking at when I bring the data into Photoshop.
Okay, that makes sense. I don't actually think we could see that going on the screen, Steve. But that
could you not see that? I am very sorry. I'm seeing it here. I should have shared my
the window screen.
Yeah. Now, have I still got? I tell you what, I am going to. I will share it now. I go to here. Right. Carol, to save confusion, this is now we're looking at Windows Explorer. The file came up with the name autosave.fit in each case for both the red, the green, the blue, and the luminance. So I have simply put a B before the blue one, an R before the red one, G before the green one, and L before the luminance one. That's the renaming that I'm talking about. Sorry, I'm assuming that you're all seeing exactly what I'm seeing, but I didn't share that particular piece. Does that now make sense?
It does, yeah. I think that's absolutely fine. No problem there. Al McLean says DSS was giving a warning about exposure mismatch times. Does it matter? I must admit I didn't see that, but I possibly looked away at the wrong time. There was a warning about mismatch exposure times.
Yes, there was, and. Or rather, there might have been, and I've ignored that because I've set this to optimize the dark frames, so that they make their best guess at the exposure time that I had. My darks were actually taken at 600 seconds, whereas my lights were taken at 300 seconds. That's because I don't normally use Deep Sky Stacker, and I use optimization with my other software. But as it happens, Deep Sky Stacker has an optimization setting.
Yep.
If you look in the dark frames, and that will make the necessary adjustment to allow for what it believes the exposure would have looked like if it had been at a lower exposure length.
Yeah.
Right. You should now be looking at Photoshop on my screen.
Yeah,
we've got to share that. Okay, that's great. So what I'm going to do now is to bring in each of these channels and get them into a state whereby I can combine them now into an LRGB image. So I'm going to start off with the luminance. So File, Open. Put these masters, and there's my L autosave. As you can see here, Carol, you can see where I put an L before the word autosave. I'm now going to select that and open it, and you'll see that it's automatically fired up Fits Liberator. Fits Liberator, if you recall, is a piece of software which will sit in between Photoshop and any Fits file that you want to load. It's a very capable piece of software. I absolutely love it, but then I love working in Fits data. You'll notice that there's a little tick here alongside flip image. It always does flip the image. I don't want it to, so I'm going to unflip that. And you'll see that the image is hopelessly apparently overexposed at the moment. But if you look at the sliders down here, you'll see that the black adjustment is too far over to the right. So I'm going to move that as far over to the left as it will go. and that the, if you like, the white adjustment is too far over towards the center, so I'm going to move that back. And what I tend to do is to move it back so I can just see the image. The next thing I do is to check that I'm working in 16-bit. It should default to 16-bit, but always worth checking that that is the case. So to recap, I brought in the first FITS file into Photoshop. It's automatically been detected as a FITS file. FITS Liberator has therefore been invoked. It's done the conversion to bring it into a point that it can go into Photoshop. I've unflipped the image, and I've made a little bit of an adjustment here. Now there is a temptation to say, well, if I do that, that'll save me some work in Photoshop. Don't do that. Do not do that. Do all the processing in Photoshop. So just move that where you can just see that there's an image there, and now open the file. And there is our luminance file, not looking particularly special at the moment, which is what one would expect. Very first thing that I want to do is to start using layers. So if I look at the layers palette over here, you'll see that I've got a single layer on there. It's automatically named background. The very first thing I want to do is to duplicate that, because I want to have a history of all the work that I've been doing. So I'm going to grab hold of the background. I'm going to pull it down to the second icon in from the right. In other words, the one to the left of the dustbin, and let go. And for some reason it's produced 2, which it shouldn't have done, probably because I was talking too much. And you'll see I've got a copy here. If I turn the eye off, you see there's no change at all in the picture over here. That's because these are exact copies. Now the first work that I'm going to do on this is going to be levels adjustment. So I'd like to just right click on that heading, click on layer properties, and give that the name levels. As you see, it's now been represented in there. So I now know I can look back at the processing that I've done 10 years from now, and I'll be able to see each process that I carried out. Now, not everyone will agree with what I'm about to show you. And to be honest, I don't really care. It's the way I do things. And what I really like about the way I'm going to do it, although it's it's the slower way of doing it, I'm not so much doing it this time so that you get an understanding of what's going on. I genuinely believe that by doing this next process, what is known as iteratively, in other words, small amounts again and again and again, you end up with a far better result. So first thing I'm going to do is to invoke the levels, which I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut of Control-L, but you can also do it from Image, Adjustments, Levels. And I'm going to use Control-L. That's brought up my levels adjustment. And all I'm going to do is tweak the white across to the left, roughly 10. Sometimes I'll hit 10, sometimes I won't. I'm going to do it again. And do you see that the image is starting to develop already? I'm a great believer when it comes to processing. Don't hurry. It's more important than the capture. We take it for granted that you've got some half reasonable equipment to capture your data, that your camera is working correctly, that your telescope is half reasonable. Just gently tweak these. You'll notice I tweaked the black as well. And the luminance image is now developing quite nicely. Didn't quite hit the 10 then, but it doesn't matter. I wouldn't go too much over 10 if you can possibly avoid it. So I'm iteratively increasing the levels on both the mid slider and the dark, being very careful not to clip the dark under any circumstances. Again, my apologies that if this is repetitive, but I think it's important that you see exactly how the image starts to develop. Now, I got to the point, I'm not finished with the levels yet, but I got to a point whereby I want to just get a sense of where I am with the background. I think it's very important that the background should not be jet black. The night sky in the UK is never jet black. In fact, I don't think it's jet black anywhere, but it certainly isn't in the UK. And your images should represent that. So what I want to do is to have a look and see what the levels are and aim for a level of somewhere between 22 and 24 on the scale that I'm going to show you now. If you look over here in the tools, you'll see there's a little pipette. If you click on that pipette, you see up here, you can set a sample size. You want to set a sample size of 3 by 3. And then choose somewhere on your image where you believe there isn't any luminosity, where it's just background, somewhere that you can remember to get back to pretty closely. And I'm going to choose between these two stars. So I'm going to place my pipette there. I'm now going to just temporarily invoke the curves tool. Now the curves tool can be brought up by going to image curves, or you can use the shortcut, which I'm going to use, which is Control and M. You'll see that's brought up the curves tool. If I now click in this area here, you'll see that there's a number coming up here, 21, 20, that's because it moved very slightly, 20, 20, 21. I'm somewhere around 21, which means that the background is at this moment in time a little bit too dark. That's fine, we'll address that in a second. I'm not going to do anything with the curves other than use it as a measurement tool for now. So I'm going to click on cancel, and I'm going to continue my iterative process here. You'll see we're now getting somewhere with our image. We've got a nice little galaxy coming up here. There's another galaxy there, tiny galaxy there, another galaxy there, another galaxy there, another one there. But all sorts of little bits of detail now springing up. Some of the outer halo of stars on these two galaxies that have collided at some time in the past starting to come through. But I'm pretty sure now that my background is going to be a little bit too bright. So let's invoke the curves again, Control M. Choose our little reference point down here. And sure enough, we're now at 36, way, way too much. So get rid of curves because we're only using it as a measurement tool at the moment. Control L to go back to levels. And then increase this. Go back to curves. Do a little test. 27, we're getting there. Control L. Just going to put a very small change in. I'll put in a change of 2. Go back to curves. 25, almost there. Let's try that. 22, that's absolutely fine. We're a little bit on the low side, but that suits me fine because I'm just going to give this a little bit more of a stretch anyway. So cancel that because again, we're only using it as a measurement tool at the moment. Go back to levels, give this a little bit of a tweak. Right. Now I think you'll agree that's a half reasonable representation of the galaxy that we're working with. That's our luminance channel. We haven't burnt out the core. We've got plenty of nice detail in the periphery here. So for now, I'm happy that that's going to serve me for my luminance later on during the processing. So at this stage, I'm going to save it. But Photoshop will not allow you to save the file as a FITS file. So we're going to save it now in its native format, which is a PSD file. So I'm going to go to File, Save As, PSD, Save, and OK. And that's it. That's our luminance data now saved. I'm now going to just minimize that and get rid of it.
Steve, just while you're doing that,
Of course.
quick question coming from Steve Clifton. Is there any mathematical reason why several small increments are better than a few large adjustments? Is it just a control thing, or?
I think that there may well be a mathematical. In fact, there will be, because this is all maths that we're dealing with here. I cannot give you an explanation of why it works better this way than doing it all in one fell swoop. I can only tell you that my own experience of it is that it does give a better result, a much, well, I say much, it gives a more delicate result and gives you much more control. So although it's time consuming, this is the process that I go through every single image that I process, because I found that if you did just large scale changes, the very, very fine detail was not as good. The transition areas between various levels of grey were not as clearly defined if you do it in a single fell swoop. As for what the mathematics of it are, I'm sorry, I really don't know. I can only tell you that my own experience is that this is a better way of doing it. I also know that I'm not alone in that. Not that that means anything. We could all be wrong and everyone else could be absolutely right. But this is what works for me. And as I'm trying to impart the best knowledge that I can, this is why I'm suggesting that you do it this way. As with all these things, of course, very important, imaging is a very personal thing. We're all working with the same data. We'll come up with different results. By all means, just do what really works for you. I can only tell you that for me, this process works very, very well.
No, that's absolutely fine, Steve. I think there's always a temptation, isn't there, to try and do things quickly and move on to the next part of the process. But I think, as you say, if it gives you that finer element of control and those better transitions between the areas, then that's got to be a good thing.
Yep, that's certainly how it appears to me. So, okay, right. Let's move on. Let's open the next channel, which is our. Well, you can open these in any order you like, but I'm going to go. I didn't name that. Rename that. There you go, Carol. I've been caught out again. I didn't rename that one. Red. Okay. There it is. Notice again, it's been flipped incorrectly, which we don't want. The best stab that it's done here is different from the stab that it did from the luminance, but either way, I don't want to use it. So I'm going to move that over to the right, and I'm going to move the black point right the way over to the left. As a matter of interest, there was a discussion on SGL the other day when I first suggested using Fitz Liberator in a thread that was going. And a couple of people, and I think Carol was one of them, said that they weren't happy with the fact that this was hard up against the left-hand side of the histogram. I explained that that really wasn't an issue and that they should try it. I don't know whether those people have tried it or not, but you'll see, well, in fact, you have seen that when the image came into Photoshop, there was plenty of area before the black point. Again, this is the process that I've used for the last 10 years. It's kept me in very, very good stead. So I'm completely happy to recommend this particular software for bringing your data in. I don't believe you're going to lose anything at all by using it, but I think you have everything to gain. So let's bring that in. And again, we've got an image which looks absolutely nothing at the moment. Let's grab the background, move it down to here to duplicate it, rename this one. I'm going to call it red, on account of the fact that it's the red data. And we'll start our iterative process again. See what I mean here about there being plenty of space in here. Notice I'm not being overly fussy here. I'm just making sure that I don't go too far above 10 each time. Again, that's just I found out through experience that 10 seemed to be a reasonable figure to aim for to get the result that I wanted. Just blackening this up a little bit. Notice the image now is starting to develop quite nicely. Oops, grab it. Okay, let's have a look, see where we've got to on this now. If you remember, we use the curves tool to give us an indication of what the background is currently like. So that's Control and M to bring up curves. Pipette is still selected. Go down to our selected area here. Just press 30. Yes, it's brighter than I would want at the moment. Cancel that. Wind in the black a little bit. So that was Control M again, so I can do a quick check. I'm a little bit too dark, which is cool. That's where I'd like to be at this moment in time. Let's keep on doing this. I think something that Daz said earlier is absolutely true. If you really do feel you've got to hurry this, I do wonder if you're perhaps in the wrong hobby. Image processing is really not to be hurried, I don't think. Right, let's see where we are. 24, 24, 23. We're about in the right ballpark, and we've got a reasonable rendition now of the object that we're working on. So for now, I'm going to call it quits with that one. That's our red channel. I'm going to save it, and I'm again in the native format of Photoshop. We'll minimize that and move on to the next channel. Green. Turn off the flip. Move the black to the left. Give that a little bit of a tweak to there. Make sure it's 16-bit. Open. And there we go, we're in. Duplicate it. Give it a name, which is levels. If I'm going too fast on the bits that I can do fast, please shout to Daz to ask me to slow down. I'll be more than happy to slow down the process if you feel I'm rocketing away too far with certain aspects of it. Control L to bring up levels. Let's go through the process again. Are we down to 2 people yet, Daz, or are we okay?
Not yet. No, you're okay, Steve. Just while you're doing that, actually,
Yes.
Ian says it's probably, and I have to say I'm not an expert on Photoshop, Steve, so forgive me, but Ian says it's probably easy to record an action to set the central slider to 1.10.
You know, I've done that. If I click on load, it'll come up.
Ah, okay.
But it's multiple clicks. So I found it was just as quick to grab it. You're absolutely right, an action would do it, but you've got to click on load, select the one that you want, and then load it.
Ah, right, okay.
Yes, we'll just grab the slider and pull.
Okay. He says you just run it from actions. I don't know.
All right. Okay. I might ask him about that later.
Righto. Ian, there'll be some questions for you coming, I think.
This is one of the joys of image processing. you can always learn new stuff. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing it for. Other people will do something different, and you'll think, oh, I like that idea. Right, I'm now going to just do a quick test to see where we are in the background. It's going to be too bright. Oh yeah, way too bright.
Steve, can I ask a question while you're doing that as well, please?
Certainly can.
This iterative process with the levels, do you think it's something Photoshop specific, the way the algorithm in Photoshop rebalances the levels when you adjust it, which makes the iterative approach work? Or do you think
I got the tip from a Photoshop book that I bought just before Adam was born and before Eve was born. It was, to give you an idea, it was for Photoshop 4, and I don't mean PS4, I mean Photoshop 4. It was one level above DOS. And the recommendation in there was that if you wanted to bring out fine detail in your images, use an iterative process. So that was where I got the original idea from. I then noticed that Jerry Rodriguez also used an iterative process, and I decided if it was good enough for him, well, 12 years ago, it was good enough for me. So that's where I got it from. So in answer to your question, I suspect that it is specific to, well, I know, I'm going to correct myself in a second. It's certainly specific to Photoshop in the run of just general processing software. But I've actually tried this process from within PixInsight. So instead of, I noticed that a lot of people, when they're processing in PixInsight, they use the screen transfer function. And they then take the product of that, which is produced automatically by the software, and they dump it into the histogram transformation process, and they then start their processing from that. Well, I don't do that. Sometimes when I'm taking the processing even further in PixInsight than I do normally, I literally just go straight to the histogram transformation, and I do this iterative process in that, resetting the histogram, sorry, not the histogram, resetting the histogram transformation process after I've made each tweak. So I do that iteratively. And I have been able to demonstrate to someone who has always insisted on using PixInsight for all their processing, and I applaud them for that, because I don't, and I can't, in fact, because I don't know PixInsight well enough. He now uses that process for all his stretching because he has seen a specific advantage to doing it. So it certainly works in PixInsight, in my experience, and the experience of a couple of people I've shown it to as well. But I really wouldn't like to say what would happen if you were to do this this iterative process in you know, any of the other packages, simply because I haven't tried it. But it certainly works in Photoshop this way, and it works in PixInsight this way.
Cool, thank you.
Okay, where am I? Let's have a quick look at the... Right, I'm on 23, which suits me absolutely fine. Again, I've got a reasonable rendition now of the galaxy, so I think I'll just stop it there. By the way, as you probably gather, I'm not aiming for perfection in this image. I just want to get you a half reasonable image to give you an indication of what can be achieved. Yeah. So I want to save that.
Sorry, Steve, another question come in from Kevin. Hi, Kevin. Steve, there will be low-level noise in the histogram due to statting artifacts. Is there a reason that you don't crop to remove these before starting the stretching?
The only reason I don't do it is because I don't do it. No, I've always done it this way. Okay. If there's a lovely trick that I'm missing, I'd love to hear about it. as I said earlier, so much to learn all the time. But the process that you're seeing here is the process that I use every time.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not missing anything out, if you like, other than the fact that I would normally have used either MaximDL or PixInsight to do the stacking process. That's the only thing that I'm changing from my normal workflow. Right, so that's red and green done, and we've got one more to do, which is our blue. Again, unflip the image. Notice again where the histogram here is different from last time. Make absolutely sure that's hard up against the left-hand side. 16-bit, which it is. Okay. Duplicate by dragging down. Rename so we know what it is. And start again for the final time.
I mean, you could have had some background bagpipe music for us, Steve.
You know what? I did think of setting up the synthesizer for you guys, because I thought that would be really.
Ah, some
really
lovely
cool
sci-fi background music would be awesome.
Bit of Doctor Who remixing.
Yeah, that would have been quite cool, wouldn't it? Then I thought, I know how badly I play the synthesizer, so you know, if you thought the bagpipes were bad, you want to hear the synthesizer. The blue, by the way, is always the worst channel for LRGB because of the amount of light dispersion you get through the atmosphere. So I would always recommend that you take your blue data when the object is at its highest point in the sky, so you're going through the minimum amount of atmosphere to get the best quality of data that you can. I don't know if I made a big enough thing of it earlier on, but I also thoroughly recommend that when you're capturing your images, you really do make the extra effort and do dithering, because it has a fantastic effect on the noise levels later on in the processing. Right, getting a half reasonable image now. Let's just have a quick reality check, see where we really are. We're a little bit too bright. It's fine. Trim this back a little bit. See, I haven't got quite so much data to play with here in the blue channel, which ties in quite nicely with what I was just saying about the fact that the blue is probably the most difficult one to get right. There we are, I've got our 23. I think I'm just going to try and get a little bit more out of this blue. That might just have pushed it a bit too far, in which case I'll undo it. Let's have a look. I only want to put a really small change in here now, because I'm still getting a 24 and I really want to get down to 23, which might sound pernickety, but there's a good reason for it, which you'll see in a second. So instead of using the slider, I'm actually just going to type in 1. Actually, that's an interesting point. If I just do that again, put in 1 again, this will show that it hasn't given an iteration, hasn't given the same amount of adjustment as putting in a 2. 2 1s will not be as strong as a 2. If that makes any sense to you. And there we go, I'm on the 23. Did that make sense, what I just said? 2 movements of 1 give a totally different, well, not a totally different, but they give a more subtle effect than a single process of changing that to a 2. Right, there we go, there's my blue data. I'm happy with that. I'm now going to save that. And we've now got our 3 sets of data. Now, the next part of the process is to produce a color image. And we're only going to use the RGB at this stage. But for us to do that, we can't have these layers still in existence. So we're going to flatten each of the images that we've got. We do that by selecting the image itself, clicking on Layer, Flatten Image, and you'll notice we've now just got the background. Now that was why I've saved each of these, because of course at any time I can go back and I will have both my original and the levels adjusted data, because I've got that saved. So if I now go to the green, and I'll flatten that. The red, flatten that. Luminance, flatten that. So they should all be flattened now. Just going to make absolutely sure that they are. Yes. Oops. Yes. Right, they've all been flattened. If we look over at the various dialog boxes over here, you'll see we've got one called channels. Because what we want to do now is to combine the channels. So we select the channels dialog area, and you'll see there's a little menu here, a little arrow pointing down. Is this showing up reasonably well, Grant or Daz?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is it?
Yeah,
Good?
that's fine. Yeah.
And you'll see that we've got an option here to merge the channels. And you'll see it's come up with a multi-channel, and it's found 4 channels on screen at this moment in time. Well, that's true, of course, because the luminance channel is there, but we're not going to use the luminance at this point. So we select RGB color and click on OK. And we can now populate the RGB channels. And this, again, was a very important reason for renaming all these autosaves so that you know exactly what color you're dealing with. So rather, as you would expect, R goes into red, G goes into green, B goes into blue as our RGB. And when we click on OK, we get a sort of magic. We've got a sort of color image. Not unexpectedly, it's not beautiful. I wouldn't expect it to be. If I spent a little bit more time on trying to make each of the images as close to one another as I could, we might have got a more attractive result. But it doesn't matter, because we're going to move on to the next stage, which is to examine all the histograms together. So if you click on the histogram,
Steve.
Oh, yep.
Steve, sorry. Where did you on which image did you do that process?
I think I used the blue, but I could have used any of them except the luminance.
Okay, so it doesn't matter which.
It doesn't matter.
As you say, apart from the luminance, it didn't matter which one. Okay, thank you.
Right.
Sorry.
Actually, that's not true. I could have used the luminance, but I prefer not to, because you don't want to use the luminance at this stage.
No,
it would have worked on the luminance. Any of them, and then selecting the merge would have worked. So you don't have to be specific. The important thing is, once it comes up and you've selected the RGB color, you then populate it with the correct data.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we now have a look at the histograms here, you'll see that we've got an RGB here, but we can actually have a look at the individual colors, and you'll see that they don't cover one another correctly. Now, this is going to be the second slightly controversial thing that I'm going to introduce to you and suggest that you use. Some people say that what I'm about to do is heresy. Other people will see the value. I think you'll see the value if you just experiment with some of your data. What I'm going to do now is is what I call balancing. And the advantage of balancing is that it gives you a neutral background, and in an awful lot of cases, it gets rid of the very worst effects of light pollution. I find it quite a miraculous and simple way of getting rid of light pollution. So the way I'm going to do that, I've selected my this overlay where you can see all the channels together. I'm going to select the levels. I'm going to grab the red, by clicking on this tumbler here, go to red, and I'm going to move the red out of the way. Now the image looks terrible. I'm not worried about that at the moment. What I really want to do is to just see these two. And in fact, they're not that bad when it comes to being overlaid on one another. I'm going to select the green. You'll see that as I slide this, green's moved off to the left, move it back, it's gone to the right. I'm now going to move it very, very gently till it completely and accurately overlays the blue. I'm then going to go back to my red. I'm going to move the red back in now until it too overlays those two. There you go. And you can see that colour cast that we had earlier on has now pretty much disappeared. So we've now got a fairly neutral background. And from here, we can continue with our processing. And to do that now, I'm just going to move the histogram out of the way, go back to our layers. And the first thing I want to do is to duplicate. So drag that down to there. And I'm going to have a little play with the levels. So let's just again rename this levels. Control L to bring up the levels dialog box. And again, I'm going to use our iterative process here. Let's check to see where we are on that background. Always keep a bit of an eye on that background to make sure that you haven't gone too far with anything. All right, now you can see that there's some color now coming into this image. I'm actually going to go a little bit more wild with it now. Wild being a relative term when it comes to me and imaging. All right, let's check that background again. A little bit too bright. One of the things I said earlier on is you want to be very careful with this black slider that you don't clip your image. For example, that is clipping the image. It might look quite nice, but you've actually lost data because you've chomped into it here. There's a very easy way of telling whether you've actually clipped your image. If you hold down the Alt key and then move the slider in, you notice the screen has gone white. Notice what happens when I start moving right into the image. Did you artifacts come up? I'll do that again. Alt, slide. As I move in, can you see? Oh, I've gone way in now. You've got all these artifacts. If I just, unfortunately, I can't point with the mouse, but you should be able to see there are all sorts of red artifacts around the edge with some yellow.
Yeah, no, it's showing up, Steve. You can see that.
That shows that you're clipping. Still see a few there. Right, I'm now not clipping the image. Very, very useful tool, that. So I'm just going to go in absolute fraction here. Recheck that my background is about where I want to do it. Still a little bit on the bright side. Okay. I'm happy with that. Now you can see that we've got a reasonable rendition now of this galaxy. We're even picking up some, you can see the dust lane quite clearly in here, and you can see these little nodules here. This is where there's a starburst area going on. But there's more that we can do with it. And one of the things that I'd like to do with it is to increase the color saturation. Now, there are various ways that you can increase color. For example, you could go to Image, Adjustment, Hue Saturation, and adjust the saturation. I would recommend that you don't use that tool. You tend to get image artifacts. There is a much smoother and more gentle way of doing color enhancement, or rather saturation enhancement. And I'm going to show you that now using an action that you will also find is on the SGL website in the introduction to this talk. Please do feel free to download it if you feel that it would be of any use to you. So I'm going to go and have a look at the actions, and I've called them the stargazing actions, and it's the color enhancement that I'm interested in. But before I actually go on and do that, I'm going to take this top layer that I've got here, and I'm going to copy it into a new file. So Control A will select it all. You'll see that I've now got a dotted line all the way around the image. Control A has selected it all. Control C has clipped it, has copied it onto the clipboard. File, New. I'm going to call this color enhance. Control V will copy the image that I put onto the clipboard into this image, into this blank image, and there it is. I'm now going to run my action, because this means it has no effect at all on the rest of the processing that I've done, because I've taken this away as a separate layer. So click on the action, color enhancement, run the action, and you can see the color has come up reasonably gently, which is how I want it to do. I don't want any sudden huge changes. I can run it again, and you see the color has come up even further. I'm going to try one more time. That, I think, has probably gone too far. Can you see that the color has increased?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's increased without any of the usual artifacts that you get when you do when you just use saturation control. Now, I've gone too far, but that's okay, because I can turn off that top layer. So there it is, too far. There it is, not so far. And just delete that by dragging it down, putting it into the bin. So I've now got a color enhanced layer, which I'm going to select by Control A, which selects it all, hence these dotted lines all the way around the image. Control C to put it onto the clipboard. It's done its work here, so I'm going to delete it by clicking on the little cross up here. No, I don't want to save it. And I'm now looking at my original image. I'm going to type Control V to copy it from the clipboard into my image. And you'll see I've now got a new layer, which I'm going to call Color Enhance. We can now turn on the eye, or rather turn on and off the eye, to see the difference between it enhanced and not enhanced. And I'm hoping that you can see the difference when I click those off. Is that showing reasonably well?
Yeah.
It is, okay, that's fine. Right, so there's our color enhanced image. We're now ready to do the final part, which is to add the luminance. How are we doing for time, Grant? Oh,
we're getting on, but you're okay.
Okay, this is the last bit now anyway. So if I now go to the luminance, Control A to select it, Control C to copy it to the clipboard, go back to our color image and type Control V. It's completely covered the color image. Well, that's what you would expect, because I put a new layer on there, which I'm just going to rename Luminance. Of course, it was a grey image, and we've dropped it on top. It's hidden all the others. But if we click on the little tumbler here, which is currently set to normal, and set it to luminosity, we've now got our luminance channel showing through. And that's the difference. That's with the luminance channel. That's without the luminance channel. With the luminance channel, without the luminance channel.
Steve, can you just give it 5 seconds on each one? It sometimes takes Zoom. Just
Oh, sorry, Zoom's taking you off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I'll just turn it off. That's where we got to with our colour image, which, you know, it wasn't the world's worst image. It certainly wasn't the world's best, and it's not even going to be the world's best when we add the luminance. But we've got a half reasonable image there just using RGB. I'm now going to put the luminance on.
Yeah.
Put that on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I'll take it
Through. Yeah.
Take it off.
Even on my slow phone connection, that's come through.
Yeah. It makes it pop.
It certainly does.
So that's a much nicer image, isn't it now? Right, there's just one more thing then that I'll do, because we really are running late, and I apologise for that. I was able to do this in an hour, would you believe? Oh my God, I didn't make the boo-boo with the Deep Sky Stacker.
That's fine. Steve, just a quick question. What was the tool used in the colour enhancement action?
I'm sorry, unfortunately you broke up. Can you say that again?
What was the tool used in the colour enhance action?
It's a series of processes which, off the top of my head, I can't remember, which is why I produced an action. So it's 3 different processes, which all built into one, which is why I felt it only fair to include that action as a download for anyone watching this.
But anyone should be able to download and look through that action, because you should be able to look at the steps.
I was just saying, you can look through the action and see exactly what I've done. There's no super magic in there. But off the top of my head, I don't remember, because I used to do it manually, and I thought, this is ridiculous, I'll do an action. And I've been using the action for years and years.
Well, if there's no super magic in there, Steve, I'm not going to download it. I'm sorry.
All right, there's a little bit of super magic in there. There's a bit of sprinkle, in there.
Okay, excellent.
Final thing I'm going to do is to use another of my actions, which is also downloadable. Other actions are available. And I'm going to just sharpen this up a bit as the final thing before we call it quits. So I'm going to grab the luminance again, which is this one here. And I'm going to run another of my actions. Now this one is very, very snappily named. It's called DSO Sharpen. I like to use sparky names. So if I now run DSO Sharpen on the luminance, it'll automatically come up with this setting, which I suggest you accept. If we now have a look in the layers section, there it is with the action having been run, and there it is before we ran the action.
That's nice.
Now I really hope you can see there's a lovely difference there.
Yes, you can.
Yep, even on my ropey phone connection, I can see that.
That's a cracker, isn't it? So if we grab that one, Control A to select it all, Control C to put it onto the clipboard, go back to our colour image and dump it on top. Of course, it's gone grey. Change that to luminosity. There is our colour enhanced and sharpened image. Again, I'm going to just swap between them both. There it is with the sharpening. There it is without the sharpening. Now, until I went through that little process, I thought the original was quite sharp.
Yeah.
But that is much nicer, isn't it? Now, there's some more tweaking that we could do. We could do with the color by. To me, it's got a very, very slight purpley hue to it, perhaps, which we can adjust by using hue and saturation now, just in very, very small things. But I think the basic principle, which was to give you a color image from the basic data, has been achieved. Those are fairly accurate colors for what you'd expect for this galaxy. it's nice and sharp. The core is in reasonable condition. And it only took an hour and a half. There we go. I think probably we can leave it there. But if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them.
Excellent. Thank you very, very much, Steve.
Excellent. Thanks.
Sorry, Daz, I thought you dropped off. Where are you gone?
I don't know if I've turned my video off because my connection was dropping in and out. So apologies if you can't see my happy smiley face.
You're also sounding like a slow drunk.
Well, he is, of course.
I'm assuming that's the bandwidth, Darren, and not the slider. I'm not sure if he's there. All right, okay. I'll open the floor for questions.
I wish I could argue that, Grant, but how you know me.
Any questions, anybody? Looking around. I think we've kind of asked the questions. Oh, here we go. Do we have light pollution data, for example, of correcting? Please.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
So I think it's do you have any examples of light pollution data that and how you would correct that as part of this sort of process?
Yes, have I got any? I did have a long time ago, but having bought a light pollution filter, I tend not to suffer from that. But what I can tell you is that if you use that balancing process that I showed earlier using the histogram, you will be astonished at what a difference that will make by giving you a very neutral background. And really, when I've been given data from other people to process to see if I can do anything with it, I find that that balancing process is just about all I actually need to do to get quite a big impact. Now that obviously applies in particular to sodium lighting. I haven't done much NRGB work on any images that have been done with LED lights, and as I'm very lucky, currently there are no LED lights in my immediate vicinity, and the majority of the work that I do anyway is narrowband. I don't have any direct experience of having to combat LED light pollution, but for the ordinary sodium type lighting, that balancing trick that I showed using the histogram overlay will do quite an amazing job. I don't know if the person asking the question saw my original talk, but I showed an image of M31 both before and after. There was a horrendous amount of light pollution in that image. I got rid of it all simply by doing the balancing trick.
So Habitat K is the one who asked. She's also asking, what about if there's an uneven background gradient? Is there any sort of gradient tools you use?
No, not really. These days, if I have got an image that's got some kind of gradient on it, I have to confess that I don't use Photoshop to get rid of it. I use PixInsight, and I use
ABE or DBE?
DBE, Dynamic Background Extraction. So no, Photoshop is less than ideal for getting rid of that. However, there is a tool that I use, thinking about it, which is specific to Photoshop, that might well be of interest if gradients are a big problem for you. I tend not to use it for gradients. I tend to use it for a down and dirty process when I haven't got any flats. But there is a filter that I use, which was produced by Noel Carboni. It's not part of his action set. It's called AstroFlat. And I'll see if I can, well, I'll just show it in operation. It has been known to crash my computer before, nothing at all to do with Noel Carboni, it's to do with the particular graphics card that I've got. But there's this filter, by Pro Digital Software, which is Noel Carboni's company, AstroFlat Pro. This does a really fantastic job of flattening an image. So if you had vignetting, for example, in the corners, you could adjust those by using this edge cleanup. If you had lots of noise in your image, you can use the noise to get rid of it. But this smoothness one is the one that we're talking about. That will almost certainly get rid of the vast majority of gradients that you could get. It's rather like a flat on steroids. Does a really fantastic job. So if you are getting a lot of gradients in your image, in your images, and you do use Photoshop, I would thoroughly recommend having a look at this piece of software. Pro Digital, it's called AstroFlat Pro. That will do a remarkable job on very poor data. And that's when I tend to use it. Again, if someone's given me an image which is really awful, it's got all sorts of horrible streaks and marks and vignetting and so on, they haven't got any flats, etc. Can I do anything with it? I would run it through AstroFlat. And I think you'd find that very, very effective. If you want to send me one of your images via SGL, that's quite clearly got this sort of the sort of gradient that you're commonly getting, I'd be very happy to run it through AstroFlat for you, so that you'll have an indication of whether it will do the job for you or not. If it does do the job for you, then time to buy it, I would say. Unfortunately, I don't know how much it costs because I'm a beta tester for Noel Carboni, and so I get all the software free. Yippee! There we go.
Excellent.
There's also Gradient Exterminator, Steve, which I think is from.
Oh yes.
I think it's from Rob Gendler, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I'm not sure if I've got that or not. No, I haven't. Now you're right. I have used that, but I found that having started using AstroFlat Pro, it does a far better job. But you're quite right. Gradient Exterminator. It's been around for a while. It does do a good job, but it doesn't do as good a job as AstroFlat. Oops.
Okay. It's thanks, Carol. Yeah, it's Russell Croman, not Rob Gendler. Yes, I knew it began with an R.
There are so many images out there.
There's a question there from Alien 13, which he asked earlier on as well, and I think we missed it. Is there any software to set up the capture files template? I think he was asking about the folder structure, and it reminded me, Daz, didn't you create something a while back for your own use? Did you not have some batch files and stuff to create working directories?
I did. Is the honest answer? Yes, you can do it quite simply in a DOS batch file, but I'll post out some details when I'm back in the land of stable internet connections. But I'm not aware of any software that will do it for you.
I don't know if you saw, but you just had a thumbs up for that.
No worries. Okay. My internet is really struggling at the moment, so hopefully my answers are coming through to you.
Cool. Any more? If not, I think that just leaves us to thank Steve for coming back again. He's our second visitor to Stargazine, which I hope will be the second of many going into the future as we plan to carry this on. So again, it'd be good to get feedback about, sort of things that you'd like Steve perhaps to go into more detail in future talks or other areas. Possibly light pollution removal, maybe one worth touching upon, because I know it is a common issue that people do experience. But yeah, thank you very much, Steve.
My pleasure.
I'm not sure if we've lost Daz along the way there. He's a still frame at the moment.
He's certainly very still. My apologies for going so much over time. I've no idea why it managed to take as long as that. As I managed to do it in 56 minutes and 43 seconds, according to my stopwatch on Saturday morning.
No, I think that was great. Thank you very much, Steve, and much appreciated. Someone was asking as well, will we put it on SGL? And yes, we've recorded it again. So as long as Steve doesn't mind, we'll put it on YouTube like we did the first talk, and they'll sit together quite nicely as well, the two talks. So that's great.
And don't forget, if you'd like those downloads of the two actions, please feel free.
Yes, they're in the original post for tonight's talk, but I'll also add the action download link into the YouTube when I put it up in a few days' time, so people can grab that as well. Otherwise, I think that's us for this week. Oh yes, you should write a book, Steve. Daz says you missed your chance for a plug, Steve.
Really? Oh yes, I did, didn't I? Well, I thought I'd been a bit cheeky by giving it the name Dark Art or Magic Bullet. I mean, it's a totally ridiculous name, of course, but there we go. Yes, there is a book that covers this and an awful lot more, as Daz will tell you what he would do if he was online properly.
If he wasn't drunk.
If he wasn't drunk, yeah. I don't know if you've noticed, but he is drunk because his face is getting blurred.
Excellent. Well, thank you again very much, Steve. This is our 18th talk. Next week we have penciled in Dr. Matt Bothwell from Institute of Astronomy at Cambridge. I'm just waiting for confirmation from him that it will definitely be next week and what his talk will be. So I'll announce that in the next couple of days. We've got quite a full lineup over the next few weeks, but we're still, if anyone's got any ideas for speakers or suggestions for topics, please keep posting them up and we'll keep things going. So thank you all very much, and stay safe and see you next week. Thank you again, Steve. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers, everybody.
Cheerio, everybody. Night, night.